I don't believe it. That's the skull of Goliath.
He used the Bible like a treasure map in his quest to find the tomb of King David.
Will one of you fight me? Israelites! You win! And the Philistines will be your slaves!
Have you ever felt drawn to the mysteries of ancient texts, wondering about the truth behind the stories that have shaped civilizations? The tale of David and Goliath is not just the quintessential underdog story that resonates with many. It's also among the most debated narratives within the Bible. For decades, the line between myth and historical fact has been scrutinized by both skeptical scientists and devout theologians, all seeking to answer a pivotal question. Is this story real? Today, we invite you on a journey through time, exploring both sides of the narrative. Who was Goliath? How did he meet his end? And most intriguingly, what became of his remains? Join us as we delve into the depths of history and scripture to uncover the true story of Goliath. Number 8. Who was Goliath? From the pages of 1 Samuel chapter 17 verses 4 to 7, emerges a story that has captivated audiences for centuries. Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, stood before the Israelite forces, a towering figure over 9 feet tall, clad in a bronze helmet, a coat of mail weighing 200 pounds, bronze leggings, and wielding a bronze javelin with a 25-pound iron spearhead. He was a formidable opponent. Accompanied by an armor-bearer carrying a massive shield, Goliath's presence on the battlefield was both imposing and unforgettable. The tale of David and Goliath is the quintessential underdog story, bringing to life the dramatic confrontation between a seemingly invincible giant and a young shepherd boy. With nothing but a sling and a few stones, David faced Goliath, their encounter symbolizing the clash of destinies. This moment, frozen in time, has inspired endless fascination and intrigue, highlighting the power of faith and courage against seemingly insurmountable odds. Yet, while much attention is given to David, the victorious underdog who would later become king, the story of Goliath remains shrouded in mystery. The narrative often overlooks the life and legacy of the Philistine giant, leaving many questions unanswered about his origins, his life before the battle, and the truth behind the existence of giants. As we delve deeper into this ancient tale, we seek to uncover the hidden aspects of Goliath's story, exploring the secrets and revelations that lie beneath the surface. This exploration is not just about recounting a famous biblical event. It's about understanding the complexities of the characters involved and the historical context that surrounds them. The story of David and Goliath continues to resonate, not only for its dramatic climax but for the rich tapestry of human experience it represents, encapsulating themes of bravery, fate, and the enduring quest for truth. Number 7. Birth of the Philistine giant. Giants have been around since time immemorial. The earliest account we have of giants in the Bible can be traced back to Genesis 6 verses 1 to 4, where it expressly states that there were giants on the earth, born from the union of the sons of God and the daughters of men. These giants were said to have towered over the people, standing several feet taller than the average human at the time. Their history remained interwoven with the biblical narrative well after the Great Flood. However, an air of mystery surrounds their existence. For example, according to the biblical account in the book of Numbers chapter 13, 32 to 33, when the Israelites sent spies into Canaan to check out the territories, they found giants living in the land, describing them as so huge ordinary men looked like grasshoppers in their sights. These were known as the Nephilim, mighty giants who struck fear into the hearts of even the bravest warriors. Deuteronomy 3 verse 11 also spoke of another tribe of giants known as the Rephaim, most especially one named Og, king of Bashan, who slept in a bedstead of iron. 9 cubits was the length and 4 cubits the breadth of it. To put that into perspective, a cubit is the distance from the elbow to the fingertip, which means this mythical king was also a giant, perhaps the last of the Rephaim. However, the most well-known giant in biblical history would be Goliath the Gittite. He was described as a champion out of the camp of Philistines, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. But who exactly were the Philistines? According to biblical and historical texts, the Philistines were a tribe with roots that can be traced back to the Aegean around the 12th century BC. The Philistines settled in the southern coast of Palestine. This was also around the same time the Israelites appeared in the region. The first records of the Philistines in any ancient texts were the inscriptions and reliefs found in the mortuary temple of Ramses III, situated at Medinet Habu in Egypt. These inscriptions were said to have been inscribed towards the end of the Bronze Age, and they spoke of a tribe known as the Sea Peoples. As the story goes, the Sea Peoples was an alliance of Western Anatolian states who formed a coalition to invade Egypt around 1190 BC. This was after they had conquered many countries in the Eastern Mediterranean, including Cyprus, Syria, and Anatolia. So, in the 8th year of the reign of King Ramses III, the Sea People launched an unprecedented attack on Egypt, engaging the pharaoh in a naval battle the likes of which the world has never seen. However, their offensives were heavily repulsed by the Egyptians, and they were eventually defeated. Following this humiliating defeat, the Sea People eventually settled on the coastal plain of Palestine, from Joppa, which is now modern-day Tel Aviv-Yaffo, just southwest of Gaza. At the time, the area was divided into 5 major Philistine cities: Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron, and together they became known as Philistia, or the land of the Philistines. As the Philistines settled into this newfound territory, they began exploring the possibility of an expansion. With their superior military might and capabilities, they expanded into the neighboring areas, taking cities by force and trampling upon the inhabitants of such conquered cities. This was when their paths crossed with the Israelites, as chronicled in the story of Samson, according to the accounts of Judges chapters 13 through 16. The biblical Superman, Samson, fought valiantly to defend the people of Israel against the invading Philistines until they eventually cooked up a plan to rid him of his power and take him out once and for all. Fast forward to around 1050 BC, and the Philistines had taken over part of the Judean hill country. Even as they fought to further expand their territories, they were mighty men who were skilled in the art of war and terrorized everyone around them. But what was the secret of their military dominance? According to historians, it could be attributed to their monopoly on the ironsmithing skill. 1 Samuel 13 verse 19 states, "Now there was no blacksmith to be found throughout all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, 'Lest the Hebrews make themselves swords or spears for themselves.' So all the Israelites went down to the Philistines to sharpen their plowshares, mattocks, axes, or sickles. As a means of preventing the Israelites from building up their military force, the Philistines made it a law that there shall be no blacksmiths among the Hebrews. This way, the Philistines were the only ones permitted to craft weapons, shields, and armor out of iron, while the other territories under their control were only allowed to possess farming equipment. Even worse, these pieces of equipment could only be sharpened by the Philistines, so the Israelites had to travel to the territory just to sharpen their axes and sickles. Over the next couple of years, the Israelites and the Philistines engaged in several territorial clashes and border battles, and it was during one of those battles that the story of Goliath would emerge. Number 6. Goliath's Armor. The most crucial argument supporting the theory that David and Goliath's encounter actually happened is the biblical description of Goliath's armor, which aligns closely with archaeological discoveries from the era. Here's how it was described in 1 Samuel 17 verses 5 to 6. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs, he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. According to archaeologists, this description fits the practice of Bronze Age warriors, as well as the armor they wore to war. Back in those days, warriors like Goliath were known as champions, and they often marched in front of the ranks, leading the attack. They were called pachoi, which translates to first men, and their armor looked exactly the way Goliath's armor was described. Leg armor, especially, was used by Mycenaean warriors from the 13th century BC onward and was even depicted on their pottery art. These leg armors have also been found in several ancient tombs in Cyprus, which means the practice was widespread at the time. This correlation between the biblical account and archaeological evidence suggests that the story of David and Goliath might have a historical basis, providing a more tangible connection to the events described in the biblical narrative. Number 5. The Battle at the Valley of Elah. Now, the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Soko in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes-Dammim, between Soko and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. 1 Samuel 17 verses 1 to 3. It was around 1063 BC, and the stage was set for an epic battle between two conflicting territories. On one side, there were the Philistines, gathered in a place known as Soko in Judah. Their war camp was set up at Ephes-Dammim, situated between Soko and Azekah. On the other side, there were the Israelites, who were assembled in the valley of Elah, also known as the Valley of Terebinth or Emek Ha'ilah. This valley stretches for about half a mile and is located southwest of modern-day Jerusalem. For 40 days, the two armies stood on opposing sides, and from the armies of the Philistine, a giant arose. His name was Goliath. He was a mountain of a man, standing at a staggering height of 6 cubits and a span. According to modern units of measurement, that's about 9 feet 9 inches. He wasn't the only one, though, as the Bible claims that he had brothers, but he was the most popular of them all. He was a giant and a champion of the army who taunted the Israelites and their God, calling upon them to present a warrior from their end who would engage him in a fierce battle. But for those 40 days, no one came out. That was until a young boy named David came on the scene. David had traveled from the fields where he tended his father Jesse's livestock to the valley of Elah, where he was supposed to deliver food to his brothers who were in the Israelite army. But on getting to the valley, David met this intimidating scene with Goliath slandering the God of Israel endlessly, and it lit a fire within him. So he asked one of the men standing around who this man was and what reward would be given to anyone who could successfully bring him down. The other man informed him that Saul, the king of Israel, had promised that anyone who could defeat the mighty Philistine giant would be rewarded with a lot of money. He would be given the king's daughter as a wife, and his family would be exempted from paying taxes in Israel. So he offered himself up as the sacrificial lamb who would fight and defeat the mighty giant, Goliath. But on the other side, Goliath stood confident in his power and skills. His sheer size alone was enough to discourage any would-be hero from coming forward, so he was pretty sure the Israelites would never toss him a worthy opponent. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw him approaching, a young boy dressed in shepherd's clothing. He saw a slingshot in the boy's hands and just couldn't contain his amusement and disdain. "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" Goliath roared at David. But the young boy didn't seem bothered by the sheer size of the giant, or the thickness of his armor, or the fact that his shield alone was enough to decapitate him. So, Goliath ran towards the defiant young boy, ready to crush him like a tiny little insect. But David didn't run away. Instead, he increased his pace, dashing for the battle line to meet him. He then reached into his bag, took out one of the smooth stones he had picked up from the stream earlier, aimed and fired. The stone went straight into Goliath's forehead, and he fell face down to the ground, dead. At first, there was silence as everyone couldn't believe their eyes. But David wasn't done. He then moved towards the slain giant and finished the business by chopping Goliath's head off with his own sword. After the Philistines saw that their hero had perished in battle, they ran, but they weren't fast enough, and the Israelites chased them to the entrance of the city of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. According to 1 Samuel 17 verse 52, their dead were strewn along the Sharaim road to Gath and Ekron. Finally, the Israelites were able to fight back against their enemies, and the victory was one of the most monumental events in the history of Israel. But how much of this is true, and what historical evidence can we find to support this biblical account? Many historians have studied this story for decades, and a couple of them have raised questions about the validity of the whole story. To separate fact from fiction, we will explore some of these contradictions and speculations, one after the other, as we attempt to solve this puzzle one piece at a time. Number 4. Who really killed Goliath? 1 Chronicles chapter 20:5 presents another account of an Israelite conquering another giant, also named Goliath. Elhanan son of Jair killed Lami, the brother of Goliath the Gittite, who had a spear with a shaft like a weaver's rod. Here we have another account that doesn't go into detail but is still worth mentioning because of the uncanny resemblance between the two stories. First, Goliath the Gittite means the same thing as Goliath of Gath, which was how the giant was described in 1 Samuel 17 verse 4. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath. The second issue is with an expression that was used to describe Goliath in both 1 Samuel and 2 Chronicles, and it goes something like this: Goliath, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. While the description of his massive spear could seem to be irrelevant information, it was worth mentioning not once but twice. With such an uncanny similarity between the two stories, the question remains, who really killed Goliath, David or Elhanan? Or could there possibly have been another Goliath who was killed at a later time by Elhanan? The mystery continues to unfold. However, as we dig deeper into the story, we also uncover evidence that suggests that the David and Goliath story was actually a historical event, and not just a fictional story born from the imagination of an ancient storyteller, as many claim. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. Recently, a sensational piece of news captured the imagination of many. Scientists reportedly opened the tomb of Goliath, the legendary giant from biblical tales, which had remained sealed for millennia. Upon examination of this ancient crypt, they encountered bones that, while unmistakably human in form, boasted dimensions so extraordinary that they seemed to confirm the existence of giants. This intriguing find adds to a growing collection of similarly massive skeletal remains unearthed in various archaeological digs across the globe, from the deserts of Saudi Arabia to the valleys of India, and even within the United States. These colossal bones challenge our established historical narratives, prompting both skepticism and wonder. Despite the lack of publicly available photographic evidence to support these claims, the stories continue to stir the pot of historical and scientific debate. Are these discoveries genuine, shedding light on a hidden chapter of human history, or are they the fabrications of overzealous treasure hunters and explorers? As we navigate through these murky waters of history and myth, we invite your thoughts and theories. What's your take on these giant revelations? Share your insights in the comments below as we delve deeper into the video's topic. Number 3. Where was Goliath buried? After Goliath was killed on the battlefield, the Bible indeed grows a bit silent on what exactly happened to his remains. While that may be ascribed to the fact that he isn't the main character in the story, archaeologists have been poring all over the region where the events took place in search of Goliath's skeleton. The narrative of scientists finally opening the tomb of Goliath, the giant that was sealed for thousands of years, is more a matter of speculation and folklore rather than documented archaeological fact. This curiosity is not new. People have been asking about the fate of Goliath's remains since ancient times. For example, during the Byzantine period, early Christians developed a tradition that Goliath was buried along a road leading up to Jerusalem. Antoninus Martyr, a 6th century AD pilgrim, provides an even more detailed explanation in his account. It reads, "As we were coming back to Jerusalem and coming down on the road which goes to Gaza and Ashkelon, we kept on for 20 miles from Jerusalem, and we came to Mount Gilboa, where David slaughtered Goliath. There Saul and Jonathan died. There also Goliath rests, in the middle of the road, a wooden heap at his head." He then describes a common practice of the day, where everyone was required to pick up 3 stones and throw them at the mound over Goliath's supposed burial site. However, this claim has been disputed many times. For one, the accounts of Antoninus Martyr have been deemed inaccurate and exaggerated by some historians. With these flaws in his story, certain historians have deemed his account unreliable and untrustworthy. And this brings us back to the very question we started with. Where is Goliath buried? There's also the theory that Goliath's head was actually buried on a hill called Golgotha, also known as the Place of the Skull. This hill, located just outside the walls of Jerusalem, was said to have been named as a reference to the fact that it is the burial site of Goliath's head. But other historical accounts claim that the place used to be an execution site where several skulls were left unburied, hence the name. Golgotha gained even more significance in the story after Jesus Christ, the central figure of the Christian faith, was crucified on the same hill. As the plot thickens even further, we are left with many questions, most of which will only be demystified by time as it unveils more revelations about this story that we've never seen before. Number 2. The David and Saul contradiction. One major issue a lot of historians have with this story is the fact that some of the details seem to contradict each other. The first one, for example, has cast a shadow on the whole narrative, and it's centered around the burning question of whether it was indeed David who conquered Goliath. According to many sources, there is evidence that the story was attributed to David after he became king, so as to promote his image as a fierce warrior. One major fuel for this theory is the fact that the account of David meeting Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 17, according to 1 Samuel 17, when David started asking questions about Goliath and the rewards that would be given to anyone who defeated him, someone overheard him and went to report to Saul, the king of Israel at the time. Saul then sent for David, discouraging him that this mission he wanted to undertake was not for a little boy. But David would not be deterred, informing the king that he had faced fierce animals like bears and lions while tending his father's sheep, and that in the same way he conquered those animals, he would also see the end of Goliath the giant. The issue here is that the story reads as though this was the first time Saul had met David or heard from him. But considering the accounts of 1 Samuel 16, this seems to be a contradiction. You see, this previous chapter talks about how Saul mysteriously developed a mental illness that only soothing music played by a specially skilled musician could calm him down, and that was the first time he would meet David. After searching through the land, King Saul's servants came in contact with this young boy who could play the lyre till the angels blushed. So, they went to his father and asked permission to take David with them to the palace. According to verse 23 of this chapter, Saul said to Jesse, David's dad, saying, "Let David remain in my service, for he has found favor in my sight," which means that Saul had actually met David in the past. So, why did it seem in the very next chapter that David and Saul were meeting for the first time? If David was already his armor-bearer according to the previous chapter, why is he getting introduced to Saul again in the very next chapter? To further deepen the mystery, this part of the story is evidently absent from the ancient Greek translation of the Septuagint, or the Hebrew Bible. Samuel 17:12-31, which talks about David being sent to the battlefield by his father and meeting Saul, as well as the verse 55 where Saul seems to inquire about David's real identity, all are absent from the ancient Greek translation. Even the Dead Sea Scrolls don't help out in this case, as the parts that contain the Samuel manuscripts are fragmentary, having fallen prey to worms and the ravage of time. So, with that vital part of the story missing from two important scripts, some serious questions were raised. However, that's not the only hole in this story. Number 1. Goliath and David in non-biblical texts. The debate surrounding the historicity of the David and Goliath story often points to the absence of corroborating ancient texts outside of the Bible. Nonetheless, ongoing excavations in Gath, the purported hometown of Goliath, have unearthed evidence suggesting that another author might have documented the story. These findings include pottery shards inscribed with ancient Semitic writings, some of which bear names resembling Goliath, now referred to as the Goliath shards, dated to the 9th century BC. The presence of names similar to Goliath on these shards is cited by some as evidence supporting the story's occurrence. As for David, the evidence outside the biblical narrative is sparse but significant. Two notable non-biblical inscriptions mentioning Israel's King David have been found, dating to roughly 2 centuries after his supposed lifetime. The first is the Tel Dan stele, discovered in the early 90s in northern Israel, bearing an Aramaic victory proclamation that references the House of David, thus supporting David's historical existence. The second, the Mesha stele from around 840 BC, contains what is likely the earliest non-biblical reference to the Israelite god Yahweh and possibly the House of David, though the latter remains a subject of debate due to damage to the inscription. Moreover, archaeological findings at Khirbet Qeiyafa, an ancient fortress city overlooking the valley of Elah, the site of the biblical battle, have provided further evidence. Excavations led by Yosef Garfinkel of the Hebrew University and Sar Ganner of the Israel Antiquities Authority since 2007 have uncovered artifacts, including a potsherd with one of the oldest Semitic inscriptions found in Israel. Known as the Khirbet Qeiyafa Ostracon, this inscription, while open to interpretation, appears to reference the battle, mentioning names like David and Goliath, and echoing the biblical narrative closely. These archaeological discoveries, while not conclusively proving every detail of the biblical account, offer compelling evidence of its characters and settings, enriching our understanding of this ancient narrative. Whether these findings are mere coincidence or concrete evidence of the story's historical basis is left to individual interpretation.